Hello there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series with our show, How to Raise. And we are very happy to have you here today. I'm glad you could be with us if you're here with us live or if you're watching this recording later. I know you will enjoy this conversation we're going to have. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor, Evertrue, a philanthropy first intelligence platform that helps fundraising teams turn data into action and build real donor relationships, working with nonprofits, healthcare organizations, and educational institutions across the country. For those of you who know DonorSearch, which has supported this series for over 11 years, at the end of 2025, DonorSearch became a part of the Evertrue family, and we're excited to continue and expand this work together. And that said, we won't be talking about Evertrue or DonorSearch today unless our guest happens to mention them for some reason, but you can learn more. And I'll encourage you to do that, not only because they sponsor the series, but because they do great work, by checking out the links in the chat that our producer, Jack, will place there, or capturing the QR code you'll see as we exit today. It's similar to the ones you saw as you came in, or visiting the DonorSearch.net or Evertrue.com websites. You can also find hundreds of our past programs from the Philanthropy Mastermind series, including many of those granting credit, CFRE credits, just like today's, at DonorSearch.net. And as always, this is a live program, unless you're watching the recording. So please introduce yourself in the chat, as I'm already seeing people like Judy Ann, and I think it was Jennifer and others saying maybe where you are, and maybe even how hot it is. I understand it's hot, blazing hot down in Irving, Texas, and perhaps which organization you're with or what you do there. That may be material to not only the conversation that you'll be having with our presenter today, but also with one another as you get to know each other there in the chat. Hi there, Dana. Good to see you. And Wendy. Hi there from Northeast Ohio. And Brooke in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. 104 degrees. Wow, it's hot. So I hope you're enjoying this in a nice, cool room somewhere. This is going to be definitely a cool program. And so do enjoy yourself before you go back out into the blazing heat. Now, to today's program. It's cracking the giving code, the science behind bigger gifts. I'm sure that's why you are here. If you didn't know, I know you're happy to hear that. Our presenter today is Brian Gower, who you can probably see there right there up on your screen, founder of Giving Geek Consulting. And Associate Vice President for Advancement Operations now at Cleveland State University. He brings more than 25 years of experience in higher ed, fundraising, donor engagement, research, and analytics. Before his present roles, he served as Vice President at 3 Enrollment Marketing and as a consultant with Johnson Gross Nichols Associates. And previously, he spent more than a decade at Ruffalo Noah Levitz as Vice President for Research, where he led research benchmarking and analytics initiatives focused on fundraising and donor engagement, and hosted the Fundraising Voices podcast, which I'm sure you've heard. And if you haven't, I'm sure you'll listen now. Earlier in his career, Brian served as Director of Development for the College of Fine Arts at Illinois State and held several roles at Knox College, including Associate Director of the Annual Fund. There's lots more to say, but I'm not going to say any more because if I did, you'd never hear from him. I'm so glad to have back one of the smartest people in fundraising by far, and that is Brian. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Jay. And thank you, Jack, in the background as well, too. It's an honor to be back. What Jay has accomplished, and Jack, I know as well, too, is incredible, bringing us all together for this incredible content on such a consistent and regular basis. I am going to right now share the screen. Jay, please alert me if there's any problems. As Jay said, I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I'm going to share with you today something that started with a joke, and I'll tell you that story in a little bit. But over the last 25 years, I've become more and more involved in the science and the strategy behind engaging donors. I'll say something pretty bold. I believe that as fundraisers, when we find something that works with one donor or gets a good response from a group of donors, we have the moral imperative to scale that to a broader community. Philanthropy is the #1 bet on improving and saving the world today. There is a tremendous opportunity with over $125 trillion coming from the baby boom into subsequent generations. We call that the great wealth transfer. Every time we estimate it, it goes up. And we're seeing philanthropy accomplish incredible things. And of course, historically incredible things. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's behind the scenes on all that. blending in things like behavioral economics, donor psychology, anthropology. So what I want to first do is just share with you that what I'm going to do here is going to be a pretty gross simplification of some of this science, because I can only do so much in the time that we have. But there's significant information available out you, including the sources and greater descriptions on this stuff. And so there's two QR codes up here. One here is that you can immediately get the slides and use those. There's also a worksheet associated with this that's going to be related to the 6 variables that we're going to talk about. I'll share this again at the end, so you have those resources. But feel free, and I would have absolutely no problem while I'm talking here and going through the methodology to have you be at donationequation.com and going through and looking at all that stuff. And of course, 100% type of question in chat. I'll rely on Jay to when we come and look at those later. And feel free to email me at brian@givinggeek.com if you have any questions or pushback or say that didn't work for me, because I'm always learning. Okay, so let's kind of jump in here. We're going to be talking about this thing called the donation equation. And this actually started when a friend of mine, Sean Shakin, who's at 3 enrollment right now, said to me, well, Gower, you're the super fundraising nerd. Why don't you create the grand equation of donor response? And so a group of us and friends, including my co-author, Sammy Zoss, my other co-author, Chad Bonaker, we started to experiment. And this is going way back, 12, 13 years ago. We created, let's say not fake, but alternate emails, and we signed up for everybody's stuff. So every major provider, maybe major tech provider, of course, the fabulous Lilly School, Do Good Institute, the University of Maryland, all these places that we're talking about philanthropy. And the question we were asking was, and all the research that's come out, and this is related to me also being in a graduate program related to philanthropy, what were the common themes we were seeing? And we ended up creating 6 buckets. And those 6 buckets are the things that I'm going to talk with you about today. That includes research from great researchers like John List at the University of Chicago. Really interesting stuff that's being Nathan Dietz at the Do Good Institute. Really interesting stuff that has been done in terms of experiments. Great research engines like Next After, and tried to see if we could come up with 6 things that seem to influence donor response. So I'm going to warn you, it's going to be super nerdy, but also that the whole goal here is for you to be able to pick one or more of these variables and think about how they're interacting in your programs with donors. Okay, so Jay gave the introduction here. I've been doing this for, I actually think I say 30 years. I could probably update the slide at this point. My license plate actually says Giving Geek on it. Okay, this is my mission. And I work for the fabulous Cleveland State University Foundation as Associate Vice President for Operations here. That's a new role, just about 2 weeks in. But I also continue to work with nonprofits all over the world, including places like Alliance for Middle East Peace, Watch Us Farm in Zionsville, Illinois, which is a working farm for adults with intellectual differences, building towards ultimately a residential model with a great campaign that they've received donations for. So I keep my hands in different areas of philanthropy. And what I've learned is that donor behavior is actually fairly predictable. Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about how at the top level, when people make transformative gifts, it's a little bit less about the math science and much, 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 much more about personal relationships. But what I tell people is there are 2 things that are true. One, your donors are all unique individual snowflakes, and they're special in their own way. But if you give yourself enough space and enough of them, you can build a snowman. Okay, so what we're talking about here is leaning into the science of everything from cause adoption, faith identity, addiction recovery, sports fandom, and saying, what are the behavioral patterns that we see in the world that we could start to look at that would lead people to greater adoption of cause? So we'll kick it off here with the base ingredients. Okay, so when we think about people's ability to give, their willingness to give, and their response to solicitations, we want to start with some core elements, okay? And these are philanthropy, gratitude, and behavior, and barriers. So I'll give you a very, very quick overview, and then I'm going to go into each one individually. Philanthropy is someone's sort of learned experience with philanthropy. It, of course, is related to wealth as well, too, because as you all know, affluent people can give more money. I mean, it's just logical, right? And we know that. And we do great prospect research with engines like DonorSearch, which I've been a fan of for many, many years, right? So there is a basis for people's culture, learning, history, tradition, and ability with philanthropy. So that's kind of the give component. Then we've got gratitude, which is what we do to thank donors or to provide incentives where they get some real value for their giving. The most classic example of that is tax incentives, right? Where we have the universal charitable deduction for $1,000 or $2,000 in a jointly filing couple, right? And that was a great thing to see happen this year. We can see tax policy, how we thank donors, right? Going back to the formative work of the fabulous Penelope Burke on thanking donors. And then there's a third thing, and that's how hard it is for people to give. One of the classic examples we'll talk about that is giving forms. Is your giving form on the web too hard for people to fill out? Are you asking for things that you really don't need that are just slowing it up? Okay. So these are the base elements. And let's go into them. Okay. One of the things that we know from research is that philanthropy is a learned behavior. For some of us, that's going to come out of a faith tradition. We know in the Jewish community, Tikkun Olam, which Jewish children are taught in primary school, tzedakah, the healing of the world through giving, right? In Christian communities, and I grew up Catholic, right? We have, the weekly basket, right? Or maybe it's the Salvation Army kettle, where your dad, your grandma, when you heard that bell, you knew that you were going to give a little money to that kettle, right? So people learn during their formative years about giving. And in fact, we're seeing a very strong adoption of philanthropy projects in primary schools, but even at the higher education level, we're increasingly seeing courses about giving. Really, really interesting study that was done some years back. If students at the undergraduate level are in a course about philanthropy and giving, and they have a project where they get to choose where some money goes, about a third of them are serving on a nonprofit board within 5 years of graduation. Student philanthropy, right? We know that engagement in things like being that thing we used to call phone-a-thon, now usually called an engagement center. Students in higher education who engage in philanthropy are significantly more likely to give to causes later in their life, right? The Greek community, which I'm significantly involved in, coming up here at the FFE seminar I'm going to be presenting. We know all the Greek organizations in higher education have philanthropic projects and philanthropies that they adopt, right? So there's a process by which people come to learn about philanthropy. One of the biggest things that people learn about philanthropy from is actually on the gratitude side, and that's your donor displays in the buildings or facilities or in programs where you thank your donors, because now your clients or the people who are recipients are seeing that some of that is driven by philanthropy, right? Okay. Giving is an incredibly socially contagious behavior. We think about things like, I'll talk a little bit later about the Ice Bucket Challenge, or even Relay for Life, where families get together and their friends and family support them. And often that's associated with a family member who is a survivor of or has been lost to cancer, right? So philanthropy is a learned behavior. Now, we also know that we can see moments in people's giving lives, particularly larger donors, where they're doing philanthropy at a very high rate, okay? This often happens in people's mid-40s to mid-50s. And one of the best places you can actually get that data, and I'm not paid to do this at all, is DonorSearch. DonorSearch is the absolute leader in tracking outside philanthropic contributions. One of the biggest indicators to making a major gift to your organization is a major gift to another organization. So one of the key pieces of data that you should be using when we think about this variable of people's philanthropic involvement is where they're giving elsewhere in the world. You can see patterns in types of organizations. Classic example, and I hope every higher education attendee today takes this home and tells somebody about it. You should be looking for the parents of incoming students and whether or not they've given to the private high school of their daughter or son. That would be an incredible indicator of whether or not they might be involved in parent giving at your higher education institution. Okay, so philanthropy is a learned behavior. People with significant wealth, as we all know, can give more, and they follow a pattern in their philanthropic adoption, okay? Now, that's the give component. On the gratitude side, okay, this second variable, okay, is what we do to provide donors a thank you, to provide this warm glow. And this goes back to a researcher named Andreoni. There's some stuff on the website about it, and said that giving produces this incredibly socially oriented warm glow. So there's a direct psychological benefit for just being generous. Okay. You also, I'm sure, all thank your donors. And one of the most important things to do is to thank donors and make sure that their online gift, that they see immediate acknowledgement within seconds that their online gift went through, right? But then I'm sure you also do thank you letters as well too. I hope many of you engage your volunteers to help thank donors or students, or maybe even clients if that's appropriate, writing thank you notes. Those can be anonymous, by the way. You don't have to reveal anything about your clients if they write thank you notes to donors. And then tax policy. And this is an interesting conversation. And I'll say a bold thing. No patent tax policy has ever caused someone to be generous or not generous. Tax policy does, however, greatly influence the size and timing of gifts. We know, and it's something I agree with, when the individual deduction was increased to the point where fewer people itemized, it created a bit of a negative behavioral incentive for the gifts that were previously itemized. I don't think it caused Americans to be less charitable by any means, but it changed the game a little bit. It's great to see now that we have the universal charitable deduction, but we also have floors and ceilings in American tax policy. And this is different if you're in Canada, if you're in the UK, if you're listening to this recording from another country, look at your tax policies. For a few years, we kind of recommended to organizations not to mention tax benefits because so few people were itemizing. Today, I would suggest that you include things about the universal charitable deduction. And one of the most underutilized giving vehicles in the United States is the IRA qualified charitable deduction, where $108,000 or $216,000 from an individual's retirement account after the age of 70 and a half can be directed directly to a charity, and it never has been taxed. So it's not taxable income up to that limit. Okay. It's really important to communicate to donors clearly about the strategy because they cannot accept the money and then give it to you. It has to be given directly to the charity and their IRA holding organization, Fidelity, Schwab, their bank will help them make that. There's forms where that can be done. That is an incredibly gratitude-driven behavioral incentive that's being grossly underutilized in the United States right now. So you should be thinking, along with who is wealthy and who is charitable, how are we thanking them and engaging them after they make a gift? How do we make this a valued social activity? Okay. Many of you, and I'm kind of wrap up these two before I go into barriers, have probably in your life read a book by William Gibson called Lord of the Flies. And there was a fabulous Netflix adaptation of it that came out about 4 or 5 months ago with the young British actors were incredible. And if you know the story, the idea is that young people are stranded on an island, and how will they behave with each other over time? How will they survive? And that's a kind of sociological question that we ask, right? And the idea is that if people are in their natural state, will they take care of each other and be generous? And not to spoil the book, but it doesn't go well. Okay. The thing about it is that in 1975, it actually happened. Okay. And it was, I think, 11 Tongan youths who were stranded on an island for 13 months. They took care of each other. They all lived. They kept a continuous fire burning for 11 months. They even had a member of their little group who had a compound fracture, and they created a chair and carried him around. Okay. So we actually know that the natural state of humans in so many examples is philanthropy and gratitude. And there's been some recent authors who have written about this as well too. Okay, so to finish out our base elements, we've got the ability and the history of people giving, how we're thanking of them. Now we've got the one variable in this entire equation that we want to be as low as possible. And that's the friction and the barriers that we provide. Okay, so we should be really thinking about how easy it is to give, especially for very new donors. Okay. I always tell people when you're attracting new donors, the most important thing for you to do is to make it easier for them to give, to the point that if you're doing a new donor acquisition appeal, I would strongly suggest that use a different giving form than your general appeals, reducing it and making it as easy as possible to just people to give. To make an online gift to your organization, it should take less than 1 minute. I was part of a team at that helped Virginia Tech and the fabulous Heather Kopech, who's now at Rice University, where the president asked for them to double in alumni participation from 11% to 22% in 2022, and they achieved it. One of the things that they did is they got their Giving Day giving page down to 28 seconds from the first click to completing a gift, which is absolutely incredible. So this is going to be things like a digital wallet where people can give with Apple Pay, Venmo, PayPal, Google Pay. It's also going to be looking very critically about the information you're asking for. And again, especially for new donors, only asking for what you absolutely need. Okay. So to kind of wrap up the barriers, the elements, be looking at who is philanthropic, do that prospect research, use great wealth exploration tools, DonorSearch, there are others as well too, of course. Thinking critically about how you thank donors, okay? Are you thanking them more than once? Okay. We used to put like thank them 7 times. You see in that corner, there's a recycling symbol. That's because you should just be thanking them constantly. So little reminders here. And then the barriers. How hard is it to give? Okay. And then we have a thing up in the corner and we say it's not about you. Okay. It's about the donors. So I do actually think that in some cases, conversations with your advancement operations team, one that I lead here at Cleveland State, about like, could we do a little bit of extra work if we have to look up some things on donors to make it easier for them to give, especially if they're new? Okay. So those are those base elements. Okay. And I hope I've given you some examples of how you can use them. So now, if we were doing chemistry, right, and we were saying, well, we've got this thing that we want to be explosive, okay, and really, blow up with donors, right? We want to look for things that we call catalysts. So what are the things that we can do in our appeals, in our messaging, in our strategy that amplify those base elements, particularly of philanthropy and gratitude? And those are connection, story, and urgency. And I'll go through them real quick and then I'll break them down like I just did on the previous 3. The first, connection, is how does this sync up with the donor's identity, with their interests, with their peer group? Okay. And so you'll see CAP, connection to the cause, connection to the asker, and connection to the peers. Okay. Secondly, story. What is the story of impact for giving? What does it mean to give? What will it accomplish? How will the world look different if we achieve this fundraising goal or meet this campaign? Okay. What is the donor's story? Okay. So that narrative. And then the third thing is a very crucial question, and that's urgency, which is why give now? Why is today the day for you to go online and give? We'll talk a little bit about Giving Tuesday and Giving Days and some things like that. So these are 3 really crucial social science levers that you can pull with your donors that can amplify those base ingredients. So let's go at them a little bit. Okay. So connection. And there's some great stories. There was a major international charity some years back that did a study of what pictures should they use in their appeals. Okay. And it's chronicled in a book called The Y-Axis from John List and Yuri Nizi. It's also on a Freakonomics podcast. And what they found was across all the donors that they were contacting, there was a single lighter skinned Afghan girl who was getting the most donor response. And so people look at that and say, well, wait a second. Are donors discriminatory? No. What they did when they went back and researched is that the donors could see their own children in the picture because many of the donors were European, American, right? So donors need a thing to latch onto, okay, in your appeals. So that's why, for example, when we send out really good appeals, we will use more pictures, right? I would personally suggest that almost every organization that around the holidays in the fall and the winter, sends out a snow-covered picture of your historic building, you would probably see a different group of donors respond if you had people interacting as part of your mission. Classic example, I use a lot of higher ed because I've worked in higher ed for a long time, is faculty and students interacting, okay? That's because you want people to be able to connect with the real people, okay? And there's three areas that you can really do that in. First off is connection to the cause. One of the things that we can see in engagement data is when we look at what people are clicking on in emails and communications, we can sometimes see shifts. Classic example is a business college alum, okay, or somebody who's involved with the Chamber of Commerce, and they're clicking on business things and business things and business things. And all of a sudden there's a shift and all they're clicking on is medical stuff. Well, gift officers who are listening today probably know, well, we know what happened there. There's probably someone in the family or them who is ill, and they are now interested in the health system, in what the city's providing, or the higher education institution's research. Okay, so we can actually see in behavior that this donor may now be more connected to the medical side, the research side, the health side, rather than the business or the networking side. Okay, you can also see, and again, DonorSearch is one place for data for that. You can also use AI and Google people's charitable causes, that people hone in on specific causes. We do find people who are very, very associated with children's causes, people who are very, very associated with women's causes, okay? The environment, right? So we can see in our donors that there's a connection there. So you should be really thinking critically about what donors have given to in the past, what you've seen them giving to in data, and trying to make a connection there. Let's talk about connection to the asker. Worked with local Red Cross, fabulous visionary executive director came in. He had been a former representative. And one of the things that we did was actually change the appeal, and the annual appeal, to be signed by him, and everybody knew it. And there was this massive change in response because he had been everyone's elected representative, okay? It's okay to have your fundraising appeal come from your vice president for advancement or from your executive director. That's the leadership for fundraising. And donors expect that, the main appeal will come for that. But when you do follow-ups to your direct mail, and I hope that you do, you send out a direct mail piece and then you do maybe several emails and follow-up, I would encourage you to change the voice. Have the next communication come from a volunteer board member. Have the communication after that come from a community member or somebody who's saying this organization is worth it and this is why I care. Have that third email come from, even if it needs to be made anonymous because of privacy concerns or sensitivity concerns based on your cause, have it be from somebody who was the recipient of the contributions, that their thing that was helped in their life, the food they received, the shelter they received, the animal that they adopted, switch those voices, because what you'll find is that different donors respond to different types of askers. Okay. And one of the biggest ways, if you happen to work in an educational environment, is to have your students do things like write thank you notes. Okay. So connection to the cause, what are people honed in on and what do they care about most? Connection to the asker, and then finally connection to peers. And of course, this is done very commonly with fundraising boards, where we ask our boards to reach out to potential donors and say, would you consider making a contribution? Okay. We also see tremendous giving through charitable crowdfunding that goes viral amongst peer groups. One of the biggest places of response in the biggest by volume of donations giving day in the country, the Big Give at the University of California, Berkeley, where my dear friend Howard Heavner works, is actually their student organizations and clubs who go out to their friends, family, and alumni. And they can win a prize based on the number, not the amount, the number of donations that occur within a specific hour. This was so effective, this connection to peers, that they achieved the most number of gifts in a minute to a higher education institution and basically broke the system. It happened a couple of years ago. The system was recalibrated, but it became very, very popular, to the points that the provost caught the students trying to play with it a little bit, making some extra emails and trying to juice it. And we said, of course, okay, shenanigans. But hey, if you got a point where your students are that committed to your giving day that they're doing that, I mean, you've arrived, right? So be thinking about how your appeals are connected to what people are interested in. Who do they want to hear from? and how can they be connected to peers? And I'm going to make a recommendation right now on your peer-to-peer or board fundraising. Very commonly when we do board fundraising, there's a bit of pressure on our board to do a give or get. And that's a very common thing. To be on our board, you really need to give or get $10,000. And we kind of suggest that board members would go out there and pitch at their friends. So the metaphor here is baseball. It's a fast pitch environment. We want you to ask your friends. I would caution you against that. The reason is that your board members do one thing that you can't do, and that's to get in the door with their peers who are often also, in many cases, very capable of giving, because I know you probably have members on your committees and your boards who you've chosen in part because they have an ability to give, and they're philanthropic. They have the high P variable, right? Okay. What they bring to the table is access to the peers in an authentic way. You are the fundraising expert. So when you ask a board member to go out there and do a specific ask, they don't have, some do, but very few have advanced fundraising skills. They don't know about IRA QCDs and, donor advised funds and things like that, right? So instead of thinking about fast pitch baseball, think about your board as playing t-ball. Ask your board to talk to peers and tee up a conversation for you to close. Have them get the ball set on the tee, the psychological yes, that I am interested in talking to this organization, and then you come in and close so that you can do giving strategy. We can do multiple payments on this. We can use a strategic giving vehicle. You'll accomplish two things. Your board will be much more willing to go out to peers because they're not going to have to ask for a number, and you will close higher gifts because you're a fundraising expert. Okay? So let's move on now to the second catalyst, story. This is the one that I think is very nuanced. This is where you're telling the story of the impact of giving, okay? So focusing on the outcomes, weave in some statistics, but focus on the outcomes to real people's lives. What does the giving actually accomplish? One of the great ways to do story, particularly at the lower donor levels, where it's like, what does my $100 mean in this $1 million campaign every year? One of the great things that I've seen people do is for those donors who have given in the past, say under $250, or are predicted that from the data you have, count up all the gifts of $250 and under last year, which is in some organizations hundreds of thousands of dollars because we have many donors at that level, and tell the donors gifts of this level added up last year to this amount, and that allowed this many pets to be adopted, this many people to be fed, this many scholarships to be covered. Tell people the story of their impact in a socially aggregated way. It's incredibly powerful. There was a great study that was done years ago on NPR donors, and this was incoming calls to NPR making pledges, okay? And it's called the Donors Like Us, Donors Like You study. They did 2 treatments, and this is Adrian Sargent, by the way. I did 2 treatments where one group was, it's pre-suggested amounts that people would give, and the other group was differing amounts, but they said, donors like you have given in the range of blank blank. What they found is, and it's, I think in the 30% range, 30% greater when the story was told in a social way. When the words donors like you were used, and it lasted for multiple years in terms of people's renewals. And people say, well, why do you think that is, Brian? Well, the answer is to why do I mow our lawns? When I owned a home, I didn't love mowing the lawn, but my neighbors were watching. Everything that we do that is social is more reliable and more sticky in terms of a behavior, okay? And in fact, the Nordic countries know this. One of their top interventions, rather than punishment, when people have substance problems, is to put people who are recovering in a social environment. And they've essentially proven that that's one of the number one indicators that people will be able to be healed and move forward. Okay, those of you who know about faith identity development, social justice identity development, it's absolutely true. What we know in terms of human development is that when we do things socially, we get better and stickier and more reliable at them. Okay, so there's really kind of, and if you want to look at the blog I wrote called Three Economies of Fundraising, there's really three things that you're honing in here. Attention. So getting attention, that's the A in the little variable there. Okay. Then you've got how do you actually get noticed? And that's going to be the picture of the pet that wants to be adopted. That's the story about how you fed people, that impact. Experience. What does it actually mean to give? Is it a social experience? Is it fun? Right? And then purpose. How are you locking in on the purpose of that donor? So attention, experience, and purpose. Focusing your stories on that. And then we have a little 6.5 up in the corner, which is actually the size of an average phone screen. What we tell people is if you can't get that into a video that looks good on mobile, the TikTok era, you got to do that. Okay. All right. So we've covered connection, story, and now we're going to cover urgency. And urgency is a really interesting question. You can do all these things. You found philanthropically oriented people who have capacity. You've been thanking them. You found a connection. You've told them what the impact means, but you haven't answered one key question. You've crushed it on why give, but you haven't answered why give now. And the number one thing that's been successful in this particular thing, initially with Giving Tuesday, okay, but with the 90-second streetwise, we're going to talk about that in a second, but then also giving days for organizations, and very prominently, almost every higher education institution has one. And there's really nothing about that particular day that is any different than any other day, other than what you've done, what we call manufactured urgency. You've answered that question, why give now? And that's because today is the day. Right? John List out of the University of Chicago, an incredible researcher, proved some years back that matching campaigns can also be incredibly effective in getting people off the fence and building towards urgency. Okay. What he found, however, is that the match is what's most important. So doubling someone's gift doesn't seem to have significantly statistically more value than tripling, quadrupling, quintupling. People have done those campaigns. It's not a problem to those campaigns if that works out in terms of your expected results and the funds that you have available. But the most important thing is the match. And why is that? And that's because the vast majority of donors who will respond on a giving day or in a matching campaign are already warmed up to give. You're just pushing them off the fence from a non-responding donor to a responding donor. Okay. Now, one of the other ways that we manufacture urgency is through how we talk about the cause. And I'll tell you, probably the number one best historic manufacturer of urgency in terms of international charities is Save the Children. They put in their commercials images and video that are very difficult to watch in terms of children who need food, right? This is what we call loss framing. If you don't give, these people won't be able to eat. Okay. There's also the urgency of win framing. And win framing is often seen in campaigns. And that's we are getting close to the end of the campaign. And with your support, we can cross the finish line, right? And meet these extraordinary goals. Okay. So I would encourage all organizations, I would suggest at least 2/3 or 3/4 win framing. But I would encourage organizations to also think about loss framing. Really quick example of loss framing. We had to turn away people in line at the food pantry because we ran out of food. We had 612 students apply for scholarships this year that we weren't able to fund. That's an example of loss framing, okay? Win framing is usually very easy for organizations because we're talking about what we're going to achieve all the time. But those are examples of how you can tactfully utilize loss framing. And again, very much encourage you to talk about win framing, but mix it in a little bit now and again with the loss framing. All right, so now we've gone through 3 base elements and 3 catalysts, okay? And this is the equation. This is what my friend told me to create. Philanthropy plus gratitude, controlled by barriers, amplified by connection, story, and urgency, will maximize the joy of giving for your donors. Okay? That's the equation. Now, what I would encourage you to do, and you can do that with the worksheet, which I'll relink here again, is to pick one of these. How are we talking about urgency? How are we telling our story? Can we bring peers in with connection? Put your finger on one of them and think about how you might do a little bit different. On the website, there's direct examples, and I've tried to give as many as I can, but there's so many examples of ways that you can play with each variable. But why don't we play a little bit with things that have already happened? Okay, let's spend maybe 5-6 minutes. Do you all remember the Ice Bucket Challenge, originally created by an ALS survivor? And then it went viral, right? And the idea was that, and this is, 13 years ago now, you would challenge your friends to pour a bucket of ice on themselves to experience the discomfort and horrible pain that comes with ALS, and then make a gift, right? Massive contributions, and the ALS organizations, I think, are fine with me saying it. It actually came so fast that they had to adapt. They weren't actually quite ready for how quickly the money came. Okay, it's not the case that every donor who did every person who did the Ice Bucket Challenge and posted on social media actually gave. That's not true. We know that that's not true. But there was a massive increase. Okay, and it's really interesting because the philanthropy component here, most people don't know what, I mean, you could maybe mention Lou Gehrig. Most people didn't know what ALS was. Okay, so the orientation towards the cause was actually relatively low in this case. Okay, but the connection of your peer challenging you personally on social media, the story with the throwing ice on yourself, it's great, right? It's great it's right when social media was just becoming, really popular, right? And the urgency, because you're on a deadline here, really, really powerful. So an example of a campaign that was created by, I think it's okay to call him, he's passed since, but a volunteer, that really tapped into these primal catalysts, okay? One of my favorites, and everyone makes fun of me for it, is We Are the World, 1985, when I was 9 years old, okay? An absolutely incredible example of fundraising. Now, on the back end, if you've seen the documentary, the funds, and the stewardship of the funds and things, that wasn't perfect, but this went crazy, right? So every artist was involved. Like, just look at that picture alone: Springsteen, Michael Jackson, Cyndi Lauper, right? It's everyone that right there. Lionel Richie, okay, Willie Nelson, right, Tina Turner, right? So absolutely incredible is Dylan, right? Everyone's artist, no matter what type of music that you were Quincy Jones got them together, okay? And so the story, right, like famine, and right at a time in the 80s where Band-Aid and other, concerts and stuff were being held, okay? All at a global scale. And you look at the actual text of the song, okay? And I'm sure you've all heard the song. There's a choice we're making, right? So urgency, we're saving our own lives, story. It's true, we'll make a better day, story, right? Story of impact, just you and me, connection. Really, really incredible. It probably wouldn't have been possible in 1985 to write a better song using the primal catalytic variables of giving than We Are the World. Okay. So kind of absolutely incredible example there. Okay. Also incredibly low barriers, by the way, because you just bought the album, right? And yes, I have several copies in various formats. I want to show you an example that at the University of Oregon, which I came across just 3-4 weeks ago at the National Parents Fundraising Conference. This is actually gratitude for a parent gift. So after students come in to the University of Oregon, parents are encouraged to make a gift, and then they get a flag that they can put up on the outside of their house. Okay, 248% increase in the first year of the implementation of this. Just absolutely incredible in terms of parents giving. And it's that incredible gratitude. And now you can show your pride. And the flag is different every year, so parents can give 4 years. We were joking at the parents' conferences that we knew it had gone viral because people were reselling the flags on eBay. So, really, really cool stuff. So, really neat ways to kind of accelerate gratitude. Okay. Let's talk about Giving Tuesday real quick. And gets a little complicated, right? Giving Tuesday became in 2012 at New York City's 92nd Street Y, what many people don't know is a Jewish organization dedicated to generosity after the Black Friday rush at the stores, and then Cyber Monday, all the online shopping. And the idea was Giving Tuesday is after we've bought all this stuff, let's now be generous. It's grown into a global campaign funded by many, many generous international major foundation funders, Gates and other people, and it become absolutely incredible. Okay, over $4.4 billion in charitable donations, and it's always been increasing. Well, it's really interesting because philanthropy is definitely part of this time period, the holiday period. Like it's like I said, Salvation Army kettles, right? Okay. Um, it's been interesting because Giving Tuesday becomes flooded by nonprofits. And so, what nonprofits are saying to me is that it's hard in that sort of attention economy to get your message across. So, what we've actually seen people do is do more in advance of Giving Tuesday. And in some cases, having their match or their challenge or their just Giving Tuesday campaign end on Giving Tuesday, but actually stretch out in terms of its messaging several weeks or a month before. Okay. And that's because of that attention component. So what's happened is the urgency side of Giving Tuesday has maybe declined a little bit in influence, and that storytelling has become more prominent. So we can kind of see actually over time, in some cases, that basically there are shifts in how these variables operate. Okay, so those are kind of the examples that I wanted to share with you. The idea here is for you to be thinking about the psychological drivers of giving, the sociological drivers of giving, and working them more into your program. What I've got up here right now is the website where you can see the examples and step-by-step instructions. And then there's also this really funny thing we put together, which you can share with your executive director or your fundraising committee, which is kind of a little funny spin on the whole thing. Nothing here is secret, by the way. Everything comes from public research. And fundraising is not secret or magical, but we wanted to have a little bit of fun with that. So, okay, well, there we go, Jay. Q&A time. I hope there are questions and
Yes.
answers. And thank you all for tolerating full-on nerd mode here.
Well, obviously, nerddom is winning today, but almost everybody is still with us who started at the beginning, and you had shared so much wonderful information. So everybody grab those QR codes quickly because we're going to take those down so we can actually see Brian as he answers some of your questions. Jack has been putting links in the chat. So if you haven't looked into the chat, take a look there. You'll see those links to much of what Brian has been sharing. And Brian, before we get into the questions, I'm going to give people a chance to go ahead and load those up into either the chat or the Q&A. I just want to give everybody a preview about what's coming up and also answer a question that just came in that's more logistical in nature. And that is that, yes, there is going to be an email coming to everybody who's with us live that has a link to a recording of this session as well as to the slides. So you don't need to worry. That will be coming to you. Just be on the lookout for that. If you don't see it, check your spam folder. Now, there are three other things I just want to call your attention to. First of all, you're going to see a very short post-event survey. It will take you just 30 seconds to fill out. We've been talking about data this whole time and the importance of it. So please fill that out. It's very important to us to know what you want to see and hear, not only how you felt about this program, I'm sure you loved it, but also about what you want to see and hear in the future. So please do fill that out. It will take you just a second as you exit today. And if you want more information on the sponsor of these programs, that's DonorSearch and Evertrue, just go ahead and put that in there and they'll be in touch. Second, look for that follow-up email. You'll see that coming to you. And then third, we do have a YouTube channel. And Jack will put a link to that here. So that if you want to see additional sessions in this series of how to raise, as well as our Front Lines of Social Good show, which comes up next Wednesday, and the PM podcast, which takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and change makers in the space, you'll see all that coming to you by just going ahead and subscribing. We'd love to have you there. Now, let's head to your questions. And I know there was one in the Q&A, so we can hit that one, or two, rather. So perhaps we can hit those first. The first of which was, Brian, it was anonymous. I always love anonymous questions. I am the development director for an environmental nonprofit. Our mission now is to plant trees. How do I convert that to an emotional outcome versus we were able to plant a number of trees?
Okay, so I think you've got a couple. I think you've got a couple of tag. This is a great study. And by the way, please email me, Brian at givinggeek.com, your appeals. Anyone that's on this, I'm happy to analyze them through the equation and help you. I would go in a couple directions with it. I would look at some of the hard statistics like carbon capture. What is the impact there? So I would go along that track scientifically and say, this is what planting these trees will do after they grow for X number of years. There is a mindset of some donors, usually those that are more attuned to the cause, where they become more analytical later. That is likely to help you with strategic giving in your larger donors. I would also encourage you to think a little bit about compelling images that get into a little bit of that loss framing and win framing. And I want to be tactful here. We are not short on images of devastation due to fire. And then, of course, if you've been operating long enough that your work has some grown forests, you would have before and after. I would get into those. I would get into those images. I would also strongly encourage you with one of your ecologists, one of your people who is doing the work, to walk around and talk about it, either in a burn area or a forest, and do that in a very personal and compelling way. Those are some of the directions I would suggest you go. I think the other thing is environmental organizations are not talking enough right now about the downstream economic impact of environmental work. Environmental improvement is one of the most effective public good things that we can do. And we could do better talking about what this will mean for the world later. I'll shift from the environment to another example. A diabetic that loses their foot, usually at an advanced age, will have a downstream economic impact negative of $1.8 million. Lost wages, increased services, medical costs. And to keep a diabetic on plan with medications and monitored, it costs less than $10,000. So a medical program that keeps a diabetic, not let alone the story component of now you can walk up the stairs with your grandchild. Okay. You will live longer. That's, of course, all still there. But that downstream economic effect is not being talked about enough in our nonprofit work. Okay. This is also, by the way, the best vehicle for us to cross political aisles in messaging about our causes. Hope that helped.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that question. We did have a question earlier that was referring way back in the presentation, I think, to the wealth transfer. And that was, I think it was Alex who asked, was that was 218,000 per individual after 70?
So we were talking about the IRA QCD, and I misspoke. It's 222,000 because it did get upgraded this year. And I put the list of Fidelity's page on that. So at the age of 70 and a half, you're probably going to be fine contacting your donors that are 70 because they'll work this out with their financial. But I'm annoyed by the 70 and a half thing, by the way. It's a thing with Congress. I hope we get it changed. But 70 and a half, $111,000 per individual must be given directly to the nonprofit. And at 72, it may count for the minimum distribution of the IRA, which is incredibly valuable. So those donors who have their cash covered, they really don't want to lose 40% on taxes and are required to do a minimum distribution, they can give those funds directly to a charity. Think about that $222,000. That's a 5-year pledge for $1 million gift. Okay. We need to be thinking big with this. Americans do not want to give money to the government right now. They want to give it to trees and animals and people and food.
We had a question also, let me see, from, I think it was from Olani, talking about your reference to Penelope Burke, I think it was, who was the author you mentioned. And Penelope Burke has done a lot of work. So
stewardship goddess, absolutely. We can call her. You're right. Okay, and you can look at Cygnus Applied Research, and they've done things over so many years about stewardship and donor impact. It's an incredible research engine. And when I say applied research, they do some of the most prominent donor surveys in the world.
And we'll see if we can put that in the chat. I think that's CYGNUS research.
Yes, you got it.
So Jack, if you can grab that, you can put that there. And then let me see. We had a question. It was another one about something that you mentioned. You mentioned the Freakonomics episode. And do you happen to recall which
How to raise money without killing a cat? Just type in how to raise money without killing a cat, and you'll listen to the Stevens and the fabulous John List and have fun with that.
It is a great show. It's great to hear them focus on this field.
Yeah, and
Um,
they've done that. They've done that several times where they brought their friends. These are the proteges, so to speak, of Daniel Kahneman, who said, "My favorite quote in fundraising." Jay's heard it a million times. It's not all about behavioral incentives. It's just mostly about behavioral incentives. So what we're doing in fundraising is we're providing behavioral incentives to do good things in the world, and we should be thinking about all those little nudges that we do.
this one's kind of long, so I'm going to try to summarize it, but I want to note where it's coming from because we really appreciate it that you're writing, Andy. And that's Andy Green with Fox Talk, a student newspaper in Colorado.
Okay,
And
great.
Andy says that they have a number of different projects, including putting together student media conferences, student forum collaboration with Sundance, which is pretty awesome, and a video journalism project with interviews for political candidates, etc. And he's asking about, given all the various projects, is there a way to convert, I guess, all of these into something that they can use for donation asks? That's complicated, but do you have
Yeah,
thoughts?
so I'd say first thing is um, carefully balance letting people see all your stuff and gating it so that you're collecting identities. You'll see even on our website, Chad and Sammy and my website, we do some stuff where you just click and get it. We do some stuff where you got to put your email address. Don't worry, we're not a moneymaker. We're not going to market to you heavily, but you should always be collecting names and lists. Okay, I was working at once with a conservatory. It's a ecological preserve, and they had 1.8 million visitors a year. And I said, well, do you have mobile numbers so that you can market to these people? Because by the way, if you have mobile numbers, you can send digital advertising to basically anybody in the world, right? Uh, and they said no. And I said, well, don't you ask them to check in at a guard station and provide their mobile number in case there's a flood or a fire? They had all the mobile numbers. Okay. So one, organize your work in a way that allows you to collect identities. Okay. And secondly, and you can type in 4 types of giving. As a blog I wrote, take donors down a path. So those donors who become interested in your work, invite them to be more involved, give those who become more involved the VIP experience, and be listening for your top prospects. If you can afford it, and I will tell you that research services like DonorSearch are one of the best bargains. And again, there are others. I won't mention your competitors because you're sponsoring the podcast, but get research on your donors. You can do something really simple as well too. Find those individuals who are on your mailing list or who have subscribed multiple times or who have attended events or who have constantly clicked on your emails. Find the top 20 most active people and go into an AI program and say, please tell me about these individuals' philanthropic and volunteer engagement with special attention to media and civic engagement. Okay. That specific prompt, you will find incredible things about these people and where they're giving. And you'll probably come up with 5 donors that you could approach individually to become more involved with your organization. That data is more and more publicly accessible. It's going to be very organized and very accessible to you if you use a professional service. But you could start with something simple like that and then convince your board to invest in a more professional service. It's a great way to do it.
We do have a question from Amanda that's very specific to nonprofit publishing. I'm going to suggest, Amanda, that perhaps you might want to write to Brian about this because it's a little more complex and specific. So, Brian, are you willing to share again how best to reach you?
Yes, Brian at givinggeek.com. Yeah. And then, you can see me on Cleveland State's website as well too, but just go to the website and you can get us very easily. And the whole mission that we've got here, I mean, we all have jobs. We're not a multinational corporation. We really want to help upstart nonprofits that want to move to the next level, help people be smarter. So sometimes, and I don't have it here because I'm in Cleveland, Jay, you've seen me, I put my hat on that says fundraise smarter. That's the whole point. The idea here is to be smarter. And I just want to, if I can just make one point,
Please.
because I know we're getting close here. We can sometimes, when we talk about the psychology of giving, fall into the trap of like we're manipulating donors. We're going to do these things to get them to do a thing. What I'll share with you is that when you work with somebody over the age of 50 to find a cause, they are statistically likely to live 8 years longer. And that's because when people have a meaning and a purpose in their life, they are simply happier. So while we're talking about using, in some cases, kind of creepy psychological tactics, it is for the mission to give people more joy and meaning and fulfillment in their lives. Never forget that, never stray from that, but start thinking about how you can use these behavioral incentives.
I do just have one last little one here, and that's how often you recommend people updating their donor screenings, I think is what they meant to ask.
You should purchase a service that is constantly researching your donors. The ideal scenario is that that is integrated into your donor CRM. If you're not at the level of a nonprofit that has a donor CRM, no problem. Every one of the services provides really, really cool, easy to use dashboards where you can just do donor research right with them. But what you want to do is contract with a service where you upload files on a regular basis, or it's pulling directly from your CRM, and that those services are constantly researching your donors. And I know there's some innovation here. Again, I'm not paid by DonorSearch, but there's some innovation on DonorSearch and EverTrue side to take that to the level of saying, hey, we want to alert you to the change in someone's net worth or a major contribution they made to another nonprofit. So you want to get into a system that makes donor research a constant part of your work. And these systems have never been better or more cost effective. I guarantee every one of you that contacts a place like DonorSearch is going to be like, oh, I should have been doing this years ago.
And I first of all, I want to thank you for all that. As Brian knows, they underwrite the series, but they pretty much let me have the opportunity to go and talk with people like Brian every week, and this was entirely unsolicited. So I'm grateful for that, because this is a non-commercial series. There are other companies out there, and this message about working with companies that you trust to better understand your donors and apply it to this wonderful and very clear methodology that you've been talking about this whole time is
listening to your donors is not a one-time act. Researching your donors is not a one-time act. It is a fundraising lifestyle. So adopt a data-driven and behaviorally driven lifestyle. You're going to raise a lot more money.
Right. Could not agree more. So if you were to boil all this down and say, here's the one thing that you can do to get started in the thinking this way that you've been sharing with us this whole time, what might that be? What's the one biggest takeaway?
Okay. Fundraising can seem monumental. We have to raise 3 million, 5 million, $100 million. Okay. Every step in the cause adoption world for a donor is incremental. All behavioral change is incremental, and all fundraising change is incremental. Pick one of the things that you heard about today. Boy, we're not telling people why give now. Boy, we're not telling the story well enough. Ooh, we really need to work with our board to connect with peers. Pick one thing, crush it, and then move on. Okay. Every little step you take on any one of these 6 things is going to help you. It will also get you into the strategic, scientific, pseudoscientific, mindset, and cause you to think differently about your fundraising. Just remember that as big as your goals are, every bit of fundraising comes from a donor saying yes, clicking a button, putting their credit card in, their individual acts. And there are levels that you can pull behaviorally to make those acts more likely.
Thank you so much for all this, Brian. Really, really wonderful to see you, and so great to learn from you. I could not agree more with Carolyn and Diane and Clark and the others who are just saying thank you. You have my gratitude as well. Please do look for the recording as it comes to you, folks, because you can share it with your colleagues and then maybe get everybody thinking along the same lines, the same equation. I want to thank all of you for joining us, of course, and for the work you're doing every day to advance philanthropy and social good in your community, with your organization, and beyond. And I want to thank our producer, Jack Frost, who makes all these programs possible each week. So thank you, Jack, out there silently making the engine run. How to Raise was brought to you by EverTrue, a philanthropy-first intelligence platform that helps fundraising teams turn data into action and build real donor relationships, working with nonprofits, healthcare organizations, and educational institutions across the country. And you can learn more about any of these programs and see, of course, many recordings of them through EverTrue and DonorSearch at DonorSearch.net and EverTrue.com. I will look forward to seeing you all, hopefully, next week. Till then, take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jay and Jack.
Thank you.